we have thermal, and we have solar. Now we could mention hydro, but I'm really against that for environmental reasons. I don't really go into that, but we'll talk about the two that are most relevant here, solar and thermal. Both are free energy. Both pretty much last forever. Now I'll give you the argument against both, and we'll quickly review my argument kind of for both. Now the argument against solar that people make here in Japan is that the initial cost is way too high and the market could not absorb that and the transition would be way too much. No, you're wrong. People who are saying that are people who are clinging on to the current economic model for providing energy into the country. They don't want to change. So of course they're going to be against anything solar. So, you know, there goes your argument. You're just part of the old boys. You just don't want to do it. You don't want to put forth that effort. You don't want to make any sacrifice at all. You want to guarantee quick profit, which is nuclear. Sorry, nuclear is going to have to go. All right, so my case for solar is that solar, again, it's free energy. Yes, the initial cost is a bit high, but the market could absorb that. Now, normally I'm against any type of market intervention, any shenanigans with the market. But in this case, we would have to do a little bit, just because of the general nature of the economy in Japan and the culture of Japan. You'd have to find a way to encourage the private sector to invest in solar, to encourage it. Now, do I want to do that through subsidizing it? No. I don't believe in that. That's too much interference in the market. What's a little bit easier to pull off, and probably better, is do tax breaks. That's right. Less tax. I mean, who can complain about that? Less tax for the building of the infrastructure, the research that needs to go into it, to apply it to Japan and Japan's unique environment. That's different in every part of the world. So tax incentives. I'd say if you have a company that does a certain percentage of research into solar and can prove they are going to implement it, you got to watch that. We'll give them a tax break on that. If they are building or selling nuclear's on my brain today. Solar power, you give them another tax break. Now, the private citizens can also get involved in this. They can also put solar panels on their own house, on their own private residence. With that, instead of doing a tax break, I'd say do a credit system. You allow the market to absorb a certain amount of loss, basically, a certain percentage. What you do is you say, we're trying to move away from other forms of energy, go to solar. If you put up the initial cost to transfer your house over to solar, whatever percentage of energy you don't use through the normal infrastructure, but you produce your own, you get a tax credit for that. You can use for maintenance of your solar panels, purchasing of more solar panels, and when you cash in those tax credits, the company that accepts them can write off any loss they get from the tax credits through a tax break, less taxes. Now, if you notice, I've avoided any type of subsidy, because subsidies are not going to work. Subsidies are going to lead to more corruption and the private sector taking advantage of it, because that's what the private sector should and will naturally do. So I'm doing it through less taxes, basically, and letting them easier to write off the loss they may incur from accepting the energy credits that people who have their own solar generation at their home are using for buying of new solar panels, upgrading them, maintenance, things such as that. So that's my plan to get it implemented. Now, thermal. Let's move on to thermal for a little bit. Oh, I got a guy. Anyways, now thermal is much easier to build the infrastructure for. It's basically already there. Now, I'm not the expert on how the infrastructure is built, but I got a layman's idea. Basically, you need to drill far enough down into the earth. We reach the thermal level, not too deep. And please avoid fracking. Please avoid doing that. Another video, another day. But we get done reach enough to reach the thermal level, and you extract the heat, and you get that to a generator to produce energy. Now, here's the argument against it. There's one private sector in Japan who's totally against this. Let's attempt to walk a little bit. Hope we don't run out of sunlight. But there's one industry that's against it, as of course the Shinto industry. They make a really big stink about thermal energy and the development of it, implementing of it, because they say if we tap into the thermal energy in Japan, these nice hot natural hot springs and Shintos that we all enjoy will dry up and go away because we're sucking all the heat. That's a pretty weak argument. I believe that's a really weak argument. That seems like a lack of scientific knowledge on how thermal heat works and how it funnels itself. And I believe there's ways to get around that to limit the damage on that private sector. So I'm not buying that argument at all. All right? Again, how would you implement it? Well, since the infrastructure is much cheaper to develop as opposed to, have a seat, as opposed to solar, I wouldn't really be all in favor of tax breaks for that. And of course I'm against subsidies. That's just sucking off the government. Private sector will abuse that because that's naturally what the private sector should and will do. You give them subsidies, you ain't going to get the effect you're looking for, really. So how do we put that in? Well, we would have to start thermal during the transition period that I talked about in the last video. That'd be key. If you get to a transition period between energy sources, you can start building the infrastructure for thermal and start experimenting with it, researching it, getting ready for the eventual changeover to at least make up the 30% we're losing from nuclear. So that would be easy enough to do. You just, I would, at most, I might mandate it. Yeah, mandate. A mandate for thermal to be developed. Not through the government, mind you, but through the private sector. Again, I trust the private sector to do this. How you do it is through a fee service. You look at the percentage of thermal energy you hope to eventually produce, and you look at the, you take that by how far along a private energy company is to getting a thermal power production plant up and running, and you tack a fee onto that. You say, okay, you provide, let's say, Japan with 40% of its energy. Okay. We need you to take all the other companies that produce. We need you to at least be producing 5% as thermal. You're not producing 5% at thermal. All right. How far along are you in production of getting it up and running? All right. You take that and make an equation, and you base a like a fee because you're not reaching the level we've set. Easiest way to do that. Okay. That a mandate would like that would provide the lowest level of damage to the economy, lowest economic shrinkage you get from companies trying to cut costs and everything, and you can implement it over time. So those are my two options right there. Yeah, I was going to have a smoke. Well, I want to finish this up, okay? So those are my thoughts on that for a long term. plan to have safe, clean, renewable energy in Japan.